Hey everybody, had a couple questions now on how to add and remove elements from the list of or the select box of users or items. So I wrote some code that I hope illustrates the idea, and let's start by demonstrating it. So this is just a simple table. At the bottom of the table, there's a text box. There's a text input and an add button. Type text into the text input, add, it's added this various quote. Let's see where that came from. It's added to the table above. The table has two columns. Text of the item that has been added and a button for removing items. So I've added 3 items to the list. Now I'm going to remove the middle item by clicking that minus sign. And just the middle item is removed. Now that's actually a little trickier than what you need to do in your code, because you won't need multiple remove buttons. There's only going to be one thing selected in the select box. Get that value and remove it. Another difficulty in this code is that apparently every table contains a t-body, a table body, automatically, whether you code it or not, and that is the first child of table. So table rows don't actually sit inside the table, they sit inside the table body. But so it's a little trickier than what you need to do in the assignment, but the concept's identical. So let's look at the code. The web page is, other than the CDN for jQuery, just a table. First row has that title things that we saw. And then there's the input element and the add button. And so I give all these things IDs. Table is called things, the input element is new thing, and the button is add. So using jQuery, I'm going to bind some functions to click events. Actually, this one's not even necessary. So as soon as the page loads, that add button isn't moving, it already exists, and I can bind to the add button, the add new thing function. Add new thing simply gets the value stored in the new thing element, which is the input element. And as long as, after I have trimmed away trailing and leading spaces, that's what the jQuery trim function does, as long as its length is greater than 0, I have something to add to the list of items, to that table. So first, I get how many items are currently in the table. When I initially wrote this code, I was simply going to select for things the ID of the table. Then I discovered that tables contain table bodies, and it is the table body that contains the rows. I guess I didn't recall that. So I'm selecting for that. Give me the table body inside of the element whose ID is things, which happens to be a table. That table body contains all the rows. Those are the children of the table body. And then count how many children there are. So initially there will be one, that heading row that contains things. Now that I have the count of how many elements are currently in the table, I'm going to append a new element. This is a whole row, and you can create JavaScript code-wise, items of the DOM, flesh them out, and then insert them into the DOM. But jQuery is more slanted towards writing HTML text. And so that's what I'm going to use. So the append method lets me add the following HTML text, which is a complete row. That row is given an ID of R1, R2, R3, however many the count of elements currently is, plus 1. Then the text of the new thing, and right there is that spurious double quote. Then I end that first cell of that row of the table. Second cell is going to contain the remove button. And I cleverly name that removed button the same as the row itself, except no letter R. It's just the number. You can legally have an ID which doesn't begin with a letter. So the IDs, which have to be unique in the document, the IDs of each of these buttons are going to be 2, 3, 4, because the table already has one row at the beginning. So the first row I create will have an ID of R2, and the button within that row will have an ID of 2. All the buttons will display the minus sign text. Now that I've added this element to the table, and only now that it exists, can I bind a function to that button I just created. If I try to do this ahead of time, when the page loads, this button doesn't exist yet. So if I said at page load, bind remove thing to all buttons of class rem, that wouldn't do it. That wouldn't help, because at that time there are no buttons of class rem. It would do nothing. Now that I've created the row, including the button inside of it, now I can bind a function to that button. So I use jQuery to fetch the button by ID and bind the removed thing function to the click event of that button. Now, remove thing is going to need to know the ID of the button that generated the click. I don't want to delete all the rows. I just want to delete that row. So all event handlers are implicitly passed by JavaScript an event object. And so I'm simply saying, okay, you gave me an event object. I am setting aside a parameter. I can call it any name I want, usually called event. I'm calling it E for short. And I'm saying that event was generated by a specific element in the DOM. That element has an ID. Give me the ID of the element that generated this event, and I'll store it in a string, TID. Now I know all those buttons are named 2, 3, 4, 5. So if I take that TID I just got, something like 2, 3, 4, 5, and append it to the letter R, I will have the ID of an entire row. The rows have IDs like R2, R3, R4. So I'll select the row that that button appears in and remove it. So running again. Add a few things to the list. And then I can delete one, or a different one, or eventually all of them. Now you may be thinking, wait, you could get a collision in IDs this way. And you're right. If I now add ducks to the list, duck has an ID of 2. Add fish to the list, fish has an ID of 3. I delete duck, and add iguana. Now, iguana is also going to have an ID of 3. Both fish and iguana have an ID of 3. So if I click delete, I'm going to get rid of both of them. This is a problem in my code. Instead of counting, I should really keep a global count of how many elements have ever been created, so we can update the code. So if I'm going to add a new element, I will simply increment count, and then name that count. Pardon me. So now that I'm relying on knowing how many elements are in the actual list itself, I shouldn't run into that problem. It has an ID of 2. Owl has an ID of 3. If I delete fish and then try to add dog, dog will not also have an ID of 3. I'm keeping a global count. Dog will have an ID of 4. So when I delete fowl, dog doesn't go with it, thereby fixing the problem we had earlier. Now, to debug all this stuff, it is very useful to pop out the interaction window into its own separate window, right-click, and inspect. Because now, when I inspect the elements on the right-hand side, I'm not getting the elements as they were when the page loaded. I'm not just viewing source. That's what view source would give me. I'm seeing the elements as they are dynamically. Excuse me. Including anything that was just added. So I see the row with DDD. If I add another row with FFF, that row also appears under elements. So I get to see what my document looks like, not as it was in HTML code when the page loaded, but as it exists now dynamically after I've done a bunch of stuff with JavaScript. Makes debugging a lot easier. And of course, there's always the console window as well. We can generate text, as I've shown you before, to the console window by calling console log. So now every time I add a new row, every time I add a new row, the count will be logged to the console. 1, 2. Now even if I delete one of those, the next one's going to be 3. Now I needed to assign those numbers because the button that causes the delete is inside the row to be deleted. I needed a way of indexing that row external to the process. You won't have that issue with your select element, so long as the options inside of it are each given the same name or class as they have for their value. You can just get the value and select by that value as the class or ID. So I will put this code in a news post in Canvas, and I'll send out an email with a link to this video, as well as put a link to the video in that same news post in Canvas. I know 1 or 2 of you were asking about this, and I bet you that means 5 or 6 more would like to see it. It's Saturday, so you still have till Tuesday. There's still quite a bit of time to get the program done. Good luck.